These young lads finished their Lent term and their headmaster probably spoke to them, and then they went on Easter holiday, and when they came back, their art teacher, their headmaster had all been executed. I mean, this must have been the most extraordinary thing. I suppose as a Protestant from Northern Ireland, 1916 to me would have a connection with the First World War. My grandfather fought in the First World War and was a prisoner of war in Germany. Although, like many men of his era, he was very reluctant to talk about it. And I suppose I didn't have that much of an interest in it. And of course, you wish now that you could sit down beside him and ask all the details of what he'd gone through. But I suppose it was part of that 10-year sequence of anniversaries that were coming up for 2016, particular reference to that. So the first thing that we did as a project in the Lyric was in conjunction with Queen's and the Living Legacies project. So I was first made aware of that by a woman called Brenda Winter-Palmer, who was the main researcher in the drama department in Queen's. And she talked about her own personal experience with a thing called the Death Penny, which was quite a big medal that was given to the families of men who died in the First World War. She came from a Catholic background, and this thing was never mentioned. So as a child, she saw it in the drawer, but when she would ask about it, nobody would actually say what it was. And she wrote a play called The Medal in the Drawer, and she presented that at Queen's as the first phase of her research project. So in the second phase of that, she then took excerpts from that, and some actors did some hot seating exercises, and she took that to various organisations around the country and discussed that to gauge the response of those people. And then the third phase of her research is where we came in, and what she wanted to do was to go out and through drama, and that incorporated film and live theatre as well, she wanted to gauge the response of people to 1916, I suppose in a similar way to you're doing, but her result was through that. So we went out and we recruited about 8 community groups and organisations. She presented a short excerpt from her play to say, look, this is how I responded to my heritage, what would you do? We had a couple of films. We had a radio documentary. We discovered a young man who had just come out of a young offender centre from East Belfast, and he had never been to Dublin. So I thought, there's a good opportunity to take him down, and we made a short radio doc. Took him to Dublin for the first time, did all sort of Collins Barracks and all of that, and made the documentary on that. We had a group of special needs, with severe learning difficulties, who presented a play in the First World War, and they all came together one evening and presented their work to the Lyric, and that's now, they're in the follow-up to that now, talking to them individually as to what they got out of it. So then we have a group of young actors at the Lyric, 18 to 25-year-olds who have a serious aspiration to become professional actors, and Jimmy Fay, our executive director, called in one day and threw Tom Murphy's play The Patriot Game across the desk at me and asked me to direct that with them, which we did, and we decided to present that the anniversary week, so not Easter Monday, but the actual dates of the Rising. That was interesting because I knew nothing, very little about the events in Dublin around that time, and a part of me was thinking, am I really the man to direct this piece, which is the Lyrics commemoration of the Easter Rising? But I started in with a vengeance to do the research, went down to Dublin a couple of times, read every book that I could find, and of course this year there were a multiplicity of books and films and videos and documentaries, which was great. And we started to work with 22 young people. I think the research for that was interesting in that that was originally commissioned, that piece, for 1966, when the 50th anniversary of the Rising, but was never made into the television documentary that it had intended to be. Now, of course, at that stage, things weren't so active up here politically, By the time they got to 75 years in 91, we were in the middle of things here. And I think the feeling was that the events in Dublin were played down the commemoration. So I was keen that now in 2016, 100 years on, that we would bring something new to it. And I suppose we focused particularly on a couple of events in that were new. First of all, the role of women. We looked a lot in that in research. And secondly, we also thought about the men who'd gone off to fight for the British, 140,000 odd, who'd gone to do that and are now recognised as having made a significant and legitimate contribution to that. So we did 8 shows of that. We rehearsed it for 2 months. We researched it in detail. We had an historian in. We did that, and a Dublin Youth Theatre came up to see a performance of that. So that was great. It went down really well, and that we had intended that to be a sort of in partnership with the production of Observe the Sons of Ulster that Headlong Productions have been doing in conjunction with the Abbey Theatre in Dublin. We had an outreach programme to go alongside that, funded by the DFA in Dublin and the American Ireland Fund. So we took excerpts out to various Orange lodges, specifically to say, look, this is what we're doing in response to your heritage. We're representing that on the stage. Please come and see it. So we present the excerpts. We did a few Q&A sessions after that. And that was interesting just to see firsthand how passionate people from that sector of the community are. Many of them having personal experiences and were very, very emotional in discussion about the involvement of their family in that. They responded with tears. There were people who couldn't speak during Q&As because they were so passionate about it and they held it so deeply. And interestingly, the 4 members of the cast, 2 of them were from Catholic backgrounds and were genuinely shocked and made comments like, I had no idea that this was so deeply ingrained in the other side of the community. So that was interesting to see. So we did that. We were part of a big song commemoration that was held at Carrickfergus Castle in County Antrim. We presented those scenes, and we had some of our young actors who were reading letters from the First World War. Aled Jones had flown over to host that and sing at it and so forth. So there were a couple of thousand people there. So the impact that our outreach had, we hope, was good and attracted a lot of people to come and see the play, which is still currently running and on tour and about to go to Dublin to the Abbey next month. So we thought we'd everything covered by that stage, and then we were asked to meet with some people from the National Theatre in London with a performance artist called Jeremy Diller, who's a Turner Prize winner, about a project that they refer to as Octagon. And they flew over and met with us and from people from the Derry Playhouse and gave us an outline of a project which involved men between 18 and 41, fully dressed in First World War uniform and kit, walking through the city and creating tableau. Now, by the very nature of the thing, they did not want that to be something that people set out to come and watch. It was something that should happen and unravel during the day, basically across the UK. And that evening, that there would be big coverage on the media. BBC were our media partners, and social media, to say, did you see all these guys today? And the whole thing would knit together. The challenge was it was secret, so we were asked to recruit people, but not tell them what they were signing up for. In England and Wales and Scotland, they'd been rehearsing that for about 6 months. But because of political sensitivities, they were very reluctant to do that in Northern Ireland. And even when they came, they were keen to get our opinion on whether or not this would go down well. Now, we did have some reservations about that in Belfast, but reckoned we could probably contain it in areas where it was going to be less contentious. I think that was probably more of a problem up in Derry, but they were equally enthusiastic to take part. I think the First World War, as I've said, is passionate with the Protestant community, and the nationalist community maybe, definitely a lot less so. So there was no question of our putting boys in First World War uniforms and asking them to walk up somewhere like the Falls Road where it would attract undue attention. And I know in Derry, one of the responses when it was mooted was a sort of silent stare, followed by, so you're intending to put British soldiers back on the streets of Northern Ireland? So you can understand that. And I think there was more of a response. I joined the group in Derry for their first rehearsal, and there was a strong response from the volunteers when it was disclosed what it was they would be doing. And interesting that the guy who was directing it put it to them to ask them what words they would associate with an ISIS soldier, with an American soldier, and then a British soldier. It seemed to be less contentious that they were First World War British soldiers, because of the events of Bloody Sunday and so forth. They're much more sensitive to the modern army. But nonetheless, they got 19 people to volunteer to do that, and did have some strong responses when they were out on the day. Pretty strong language shouted by people, including bus drivers and people in the streets. We had less of that. I mean, we'd really only one incident of somebody shouting out to them in terms of, you killed my grandfather, you bastards, go home. So apart from that, the response was good, and on the streets again, people were really emotional. And people who didn't even know what was happening would come out. And I think the beautiful thing about that was that the soldiers didn't speak. If there'd been any question of actors trying to improvise scenes, I think that would have been a very clumsy way of doing it. But Jeremy had designed it so that when the public came up to engage with these lads, that all they could do was to give them a little card saying, my name is so-and-so, I was killed at the Battle of the Somme in 1916. And the rehearsals for this were really about taking young people and saying, can you behave absolutely normally? Don't change your behaviour. So when they were engaging with the public, they couldn't smile, they couldn't be intimidating, they had to be welcoming, and there were various ways in which you could give that card over as a gesture of thanks or a response or something. And I think being met with that blank stare and just given this card, people, there were women who just wept. And sort of said, I'm not quite sure why I'm feeling so emotional. I think the group of men that we used, there were a few 16, 17-year-olds who looked very, very young and vulnerable. And when you saw them on the train, for example, because we travelled up to Ballymena and met the Derry crowd, at one point I looked over and one lad was sitting with his head on the other one's shoulder sleeping. But bottles of water, modern bottles of water in front of them. And I thought, oh no, that you weren't meant to do this. And afterwards they told me that the businessman sitting opposite them had spoken to them, and when he received the card, he just went and bought them a bottle of water each and set it down for them. So there was a real sort of feeling of wanting to be kind. And I suppose if you're watching a film or reading a book on First World War and the vulnerability and awfulness of it all, there's not much you can do. And maybe when people are face to face with another human being, they wanted to respond in some way as an act of kindness to support them. It was a simple idea in retrospect, and when we looked at all the coverage, and they had something like 2,500 people involved in this across the UK that day, you thought, if we were doing it again now it would be easy. But at the time, it was meticulously done with uniforms made and the kit. And I think as Jeremy walked around the country and met various groups, he could see, I'm not sure quite what I want, but I know what I don't want. Don't do this, don't do that. And the coverage of that through social media, WhatsApp, we were sending stuff through every half an hour. It was a mega operation, a huge undertaking. Very brave of the National and Birmingham rep who did that. And I think at the heels of the hunt, they were very pleased, and we were delighted that we had agreed, and it genuinely then was UK wide. And they would have been very interested to have taken it to Dublin had it not been just so late in the day, and it would have been great to see the response there as well. I mean, I think it was the juxtaposition of soldiers in First World War uniforms in a modern setting, and our initial response was, what about war memorials and museums? And he said, no, absolutely not, I don't want that. That's where you'd expect to see the soldiers. And yeah, those events are very sombre and respectful, But I think when you see people walking through a shopping centre and young men sitting next to people on the train or on park benches, that's when it really comes alive. So I think it ended up being much more poignant than perhaps some of those ceremonies. If young people had been improvising, I think that would have strayed into very dangerous territory that could instantly become disrespectful. But it was so beautifully and simply done, and very, very effective to hand over those cards that had nothing. It was a plain white card, so there was nothing that was commercial about it or offensive in any way. At one point I asked Jeremy, was it ghosts he was aiming at? Was it a bit like a sort of parallel time? And he said, no, it wasn't. It was just people from 2016 directly in contact with people who could have been 1916. And what is your response? How do people respond to that? Personally, I because I knew so little about the Easter Rising before I started, and I would have had views which realistically I have because I was brought up by Protestant parents, and I don't know if you can ever grow up in Northern Ireland or maybe Ireland in general and have a totally unaffected view of that. And as I started to research it and find out everything that had happened before 1916, I found myself thinking, yeah, I can see why people were very angry about that, and why people did. I mean, I'll be honest and say, when I started off, I'd always thought that the leaders of the Rising were paramilitary people, equivalent to what we might have today. So the first big shock was whenever I realised they were barristers and poets. And when I went to St Enda's, I mean, I taught in a boarding school myself for 12 years. And I walked in and saw the study and Pearse's study there and thought, good Lord, these young lads finished their Lent term and their headmaster probably spoke to them. And then they went on Easter holiday, and when they came back, their art teacher, their headmaster had all been executed. I mean, this must have been the most extraordinary thing. So it really made me feel, how can I ever have a strong opinion on anything ever again without doing extensive research on it? So it really undermined the sort of adamant view that people tend to have, and watching other people spout on about things and you think, but do you actually know what happened or led up to this? I think my other reaction when I went to St Enda's and read a lot about Pearse and the whole indoctrination process that was going on there, I thought, this is very like the radicalisation that we're dealing with now in society. And he was, I found him a fascinating man, whether he was a radical educationalist or completely bonkers, as Ruth Dudley Edwards would suggest he is. So it really did inform the way I would look at other things in the 21st century. I think theatre, and this really did come out of discussions that we had, some with the Orange Order. I spoke to one man who for the last 5 or 6 years has been working with us and was very excited about theatre and discovered theatre as a really good medium. I think in discussions with him on this, I realised what he meant was he thinks theatre is great if it's endorsing the views that he already has. He was very reluctant to support anything that challenged him or another side of the story, so he chose not to come and see the Patriot game, and then ultimately decided not to come and see Observe the Sons of Ulster because of the homosexual themes in that they found abhorrent. So I found that quite enlightening, that someone could be so reluctant to be exposed to it. And I suppose for me as head of creative learning, it really endorsed one of the uses of theatre to challenge people. I mean, you can say that glibly, can't you? Oh yeah, we want to challenge this. But that was one specific instance where I thought, really, to present a programme that shows the thing from both sides. And a number of people I know who came to see the Patriot game came out with their views altered and thought, I had no idea that's what it was. So fair play to Tom Murphy on writing such an eloquent piece. When we were in rehearsal for that, I was contacted by a friend of mine I hadn't seen for 25 years, a girl who'd grown up near the Shankill Road in Belfast, which is a fairly strong unionist area. And she came in to see me. We had lunch together, and she said, I have something interesting to tell you. She said, I discovered 5 years ago that I'm James Connolly's great-granddaughter. And she'd just come back from America for all the commemorations and was there as a VIP. So she came to see the show and chatted to the actor who was playing James Connolly. And that is your ultimate revelation for 1916 for a Protestant girl to discover she's related to Connolly. I think a year ago I really wouldn't have predicted that I would have been glued to the television for the ceremony in Dublin. I didn't think I would get into it as much as I have, and Irish history in general, because of course when you start following a thread it leads you in different directions. For me, Patriot Game and what I found out about the Easter Rising, simply because I had directed plays before in the First World War, and you're sort of thinking, oh, not again, and that's horrendous thought that you would never, that you become bored with that. But the whole situation in Dublin I found fascinating, something I take away from it. I'm really glad that I got involved in.